Ancient civilizations held the keys to realities we can barely comprehend. We are about to uncover 25 of their most profound and mystical rituals, practices designed to command the elements and speak with the gods. By the end of this journey, you will understand the secret beliefs that built and destroyed entire worlds. Why did the Maya reanimate creation with a deadly ball game? And what did the Norse seers truly see when they traveled between worlds? What single ritual from a lost society would you want to witness for yourself? The Stone Court was a stage for life and death. In the heart of ancient Maya cities, the thunderous echo of a heavy rubber ball signaled the beginning of Paketak, a game far more serious than any modern sport. Players, clad in protective padding, could not use their hands or feet, only their hips, knees, and elbows to propel a solid ball through a stone ring high on a wall. The physical demand was immense, but the spiritual stakes were absolute. Victory was glorious, but defeat often meant a captain, or sometimes the entire losing team, was offered to the gods. This was not mere punishment, it was the ultimate honor, a sacred duty. The Maya saw this ritual as a direct reenactment of their creation story from the Popol Vuh. In that myth, the hero twins journeyed into the dark underworld and defeated its lords in a legendary ballgame, paving the way for the dawn of humanity and the rising of the sun. Every match on Earth was a cosmic replay of that primordial struggle. The movement of the ball itself was a celestial dance, theorized to represent the journey of the sun across the sky or the perilous path of stars through the night. Deep carvings at places like Chichen Itza forever freeze these moments in stone, showing players poised in action, often beside skeletal underworld deities, a permanent testament to the game's profound and deadly significance. This was not a sport. It was a conversation with the cosmos, where a human life was the most powerful word that could be spoken. That conversation with the cosmos found a powerful echo in the deserts of Egypt. While the Maya offered life to sustain the cosmic order, the Egyptians perfected a ritual to conquer death itself. This was the opening of the mouth ceremony, a final and essential act of magic performed for every elite burial. Imagine the scene within a tomb's inner chamber, the air thick with incense and the weight of eternity. A priest, dressed as the jackal god Anubis, would approach the mummy or a statue representing the deceased. In his hands, he held a sacred adze, a blade made of meteoric iron, a material believed to possess the power of the stars themselves. With the utmost precision, he would touch this instrument to the mouth, then the eyes, the ears, and finally the nose of the still form. Each touch was not a physical opening, but a profound spiritual reawakening. The priest would recite potent spells from the Book of the Dead, calling upon the gods to restore the senses stolen by death. Why was this so vital? The Egyptians believed the afterlife was a tangible place, the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance where the soul would live forever. But to enjoy this eternal life, the deceased needed to be fully functional. Without the opening of the mouth, the soul would be a blind, deaf, and mute prisoner in its own body, unable to eat the offered food, drink the celestial water, or breathe the air of the next world. This ceremony was the key that unlocked existence. It transformed the deceased from a mere body into an act, an effective and illuminated spirit capable of interacting with the divine realm. The tools used, from the adze to a forked Pesach kef knife, were not just symbols. They were the literal implements of resurrection, believed to channel divine power directly into the mortal remains. This was not a farewell. It was a final, loving act of preparation, sending a loved one fully equipped into the great beyond. Across the sea, in the deep, misty forests of ancient Gaul and Britain, an entirely different kind of magic was practiced. The Celtic Druids sought their power not in grand tombs, but in living, breathing nature. Their most revered ritual involved a single, sacred plant growing high in the branches of an oak tree. According to the Roman historian Pliny the Elder, the Druids believed mistletoe was a gift from the heavens, a plant that never touched the earth and thus held a pure, celestial power. The ceremony to harvest it was a spectacle of profound precision and sanctity. It could only be performed on the 6th day of the moon, a moment when the lunar energy was considered just right. A single Druid priest, clothed in a spotless white robe, would climb the mighty oak. He did not carry a common blade. In his hand was a golden sickle, a tool crafted specifically for this sacred act, for iron was considered too base a metal to touch such a divine substance. With great care, he would cut the mistletoe. Another priest standing below would catch it in a pure white cloth before it could be desecrated by contact with the ground. Why such elaborate precautions? The Druids saw the plant as a powerful conduit, a direct link between the heavens and the earth. They believed it could cure any poison, make barren animals fertile, and offer protection against all evil. But the ritual did not end with the harvest. As a final act of gratitude and sacrifice, 2 magnificent white bulls were brought to the sacred grove. Their throats were cut in a solemn offering, a reciprocal gift of life for the divine life-giving power the Druids had just received. This entire ceremony, from the lunar timing to the color of the robes and the bulls, underscores a worldview where every element of nature was interconnected and pulsating with spirit. The sacred groves where these rites were held were not merely clusters of trees. They were the temples of the Druids, living cathedrals where the boundary between the human world and the divine was at its thinnest. While the Druids sought communion with nature, the Norse confronted destiny itself through a sorcery that bent the very fabric of reality. This was Seidr, a form of magic both revered and feared. At its heart was the Volva, a wandering seeress. She was not a priestess in a temple, but a solitary figure of immense power, welcomed with feasts in great halls because she alone could travel the unseen pathways between the worlds. Her rituals were journeys into the unknown. A high seat or platform was erected for her, a literal and symbolic place set apart from the ordinary ground. Seated there, she would enter a deep trance, her consciousness slipping from her body to wander the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Her tools were simple yet potent. A carved staff, often of iron, served as her focal point, a conduit for the energy she manipulated. Around her, assistants would chant Galdr, ancient songs of power whose rhythms and words were believed to shape fate. The goal was to see Weird, the Norse concept of a tangled web of destiny that governed all things. A Volva could peer into this web to foretell the fate of a family, a harvest, or a king. She could cast spells of protection or curses of ruin, weaving new threads into the cosmic tapestry. This power was so immense that it carried a deep social stigma for men. Seidr was considered a fundamentally feminine art, and its practice involved a perceived surrender of control that was at odds with the Viking ideal of male strength. The lore tells us that even the Allfather Odin, the king of the gods, was not above its use. He learned the secrets of Seidr to protect his reign, but for this, he was mocked by other gods as unmanly. His willingness to endure such shame reveals a profound truth. In the Norse world, power was what mattered, and Seidr was a force so potent that even a god would risk his honor to command it. High in the thin, cold air of the Andes, the Inca conducted a ritual of profound gravity, the Kapakacha. This was not an act of cruelty, but one of ultimate reciprocity, a desperate plea to the gods during times of severe crisis. When famine gripped the land, when the earth shook with violent tremors, or upon the death of a divine emperor, the Inca would offer their most precious possession to restore balance to the world. They offered their children, selected from across the vast empire. These boys and girls were chosen for their perfection and purity, often the children of nobility. Their journey was a sacred pilgrimage, a long procession from the capital of Cusco high into the sacred peaks, places believed to be the dwelling spots of powerful mountain spirits. The children, dressed in fine textiles and accompanied by priests, were not marched to their doom as prisoners. They were treated as honored emissaries, destined to become immortal guardians who would forever watch over their people from the realm of the gods. To ease their final passage, the children were given chicha, a potent maize beer, and chewed coca leaves, substances that would have sedated them against the biting cold and the thin air. In their final moments, placed in small tombs or seated upon the mountaintop, they would simply fall asleep, succumbing to the cold, or in some cases, receive a single, merciful blow to the head. The discovery of these sacrifices, like the famous Lulelaco maiden found in Argentina, gives us a heartbreakingly clear window into this practice. Her body, perfectly preserved by the ice for 500 years, sits curled up, her face peaceful, her fine clothes and accompanying artifacts untouched. She was not a victim of violence, but a frozen moment of sacrifice, a child sent to live forever among the gods to ensure her civilization could continue to live on Earth. From the silent peaks of the Andes, we travel to the roaring heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where the very order of the universe was renewed each year in a spectacle of public drama. The Decode festival in Babylon was not merely a celebration, it was a 12-day-long ritual that held the entire cosmos in balance. At its center was the supreme god Marduk, a deity whose statue was not a simple idol, but a living vessel for his divine presence. The festival began with a startling act. The statue of Marduk was ritually removed from his magnificent temple, Esagila, and placed onto a grand ceremonial boat. He was then paraded with immense fanfare through the city's Ishtar Gate and along the processional way, a path adorned with glazed blue bricks and golden lions. But this was not a journey of triumph. The god was taken to a special building known as the Decode House, a temple situated outside the city walls. This symbolized Marduk's harrowing journey to the underworld, a period of chaos and death that the world had to endure before it could be reborn. The most shocking moment, however, was reserved for the king of Babylon himself. In a profound public ceremony, the monarch would enter Marduk's temple. There, before the gaze of the gods, the high priest would perform a ritual of ultimate humiliation. He would slap the king across the face with such force that it was meant to bring tears to his eyes. Then he would pull the king's ears, a physical act designed to humble the most powerful man in the empire. Why such a startling display? This was a test of divine favor. If the king cried, it was a sign that the god Marduk was pleased and would support his rule for the coming year. This ritual ensured the king was not a proud tyrant, but a humble servant, fit to mediate between the people and the gods. Following this, the priests would recite the entire Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, which told of Marduk's victory over the primordial sea goddess Tiamat and his establishment of the world from her body. This recitation was a magical act, a refounding of the world through sacred words. After the 12 days, Marduk's statue was triumphantly returned to his temple, symbolizing his return from the underworld and the restoration of cosmic order. The Decode festival was a massive reset button for civilization, reaffirming that the king, the gods, and the very laws of nature were all in their proper place, ready for another year. The roar of the bull echoed through a different kind of courtyard, one painted with vibrant frescoes on the sun-drenched island of Crete. Here, the Minoans engaged in what might be the most breathtaking ritual of all, a dance with death itself known as bull leaping. Imagine a scene of pure, kinetic energy. A powerful bull, its muscles coiled, charges across a stone arena. As it closes in, a young acrobat, perhaps a man or a woman, sprints directly toward the massive animal. At the last possible second, the leaper grabs the bull's horns, using the beast's own violent head toss to propel themselves into a high, arcing somersault over its back, landing gracefully on their feet behind it. This was not a chaotic brawl, but a highly stylized, incredibly dangerous performance, a fusion of sport, art, and profound spiritual meaning. Was it a test of courage for young initiates, a public spectacle to demonstrate human skill, or a sacred offering to the bull, an animal the Minoans revered as a direct manifestation of divine power? The truth likely wove all these threads together. The immense risk was the entire point. A single misjudgment, a slip of the hand, and the dancer would be gored or trampled. This ever-present danger transformed the act from a mere stunt into a ritual of ultimate consequence. It was a physical conversation with the raw, untamed force of nature, a demonstration that humanity could, through grace and courage, momentarily master the chaos represented by the bull. This symbolism ties directly into the island's most famous legend, the Minotaur. That creature, half man and half bull, imprisoned in a labyrinth, represents the terrifying, monstrous aspect of this same power. The bull leaping ceremony can be seen as the civilized counterpart to that myth. Instead of a hero slaying the beast in a dark maze, these acrobats confronted the living bull in the open light, not to destroy it, but to engage with it, to channel its ferocity into a moment of transcendent human achievement. They were not fighting the monster, they were dancing with it, and in doing so, they perhaps believed they were honoring the very god it represented. A profound dread fell over the Aztec Empire every 52 years. This was the moment the great calendar cycle, known as the Xiumilpili, or the binding of the years, came to its terrifying end. The Aztecs saw time not as a straight line, but as a series of repeating, fragile cycles, and the close of each 52-year period was a point of maximum vulnerability. The central fear was absolute. The sun might fail to rise, and the fifth world, their world, would be consumed by star demons, plunging into an eternal, silent darkness. As the final days approached, the entire population prepared for the end. They extinguished every single fire in every home and every temple across the vast empire. People would then destroy their clay cooking pots, their household idols, and sweep their homes clean, a symbolic act of ending one life in preparation for either oblivion or a new beginning. The world held its breath in complete blackness, awaiting a sign from the gods. All hope rested on a single ceremony performed on the Hill of the Star, a mountain overlooking the great capital of Tenochtitlan. There, under a sky crowded with watchful stars, priests gathered around a high-ranking captive, often a valorous enemy warrior. At the precise moment the star cluster we call the Pleiades reached its zenith in the night sky, the chief priest would perform the critical act. He would open the captive's chest and attempt to kindle a new fire within the cavity. The tension in that moment is almost unimaginable. If the fire caught, if a spark flared and grew into a flame within the warrior's body, a tremendous roar of relief and joy would erupt from the watching priests. It was a sign the sun had been fed and would continue its journey. The world was granted another 52 years of life. Runners, holding torches lit from this primal, sacrificial flame, would then sprint from the hilltop to every corner of the empire, carrying the new fire to relight the hearths of every city, town, and home. This was not just the lighting of a flame, it was the rebirth of the entire cosmos, sparked from a single, sacred human heart. The world's renewal in Babylon depended on the king's humility, but in the older cities of Sumer, it required a king to become a god. The sacred marriage rite, or hieros gamos, was the ultimate expression of this belief. In the heart of the ziggurat, within the holy temple of the goddess Inanna, the king of a Sumerian city-state would shed his mortal identity. For one night, he was not a political ruler, but the shepherd god Dumuzi, the beloved consort of the goddess. His partner was a high priestess, the living embodiment of Inanna herself, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. Their physical union was far more than a private act. It was a public, state-sponsored ritual of cosmic consequence. This was the divine engine that powered the entire kingdom. The belief was direct and profound. The energy released from the union of the god and goddess on earth would flow into the very soil, guaranteeing abundant harvests, healthy livestock, and the steady flow of vital rivers. Without this annual ritual, the land itself would wither and die. We know of this ceremony not from vague legends, but from exquisite cuneiform tablets preserving passionate love songs, exchanged between the two principles. In these poems, the priestess, as Inanna, sings of her body as a fertile field, awaiting her divine lover. The king, as Dumuzi, praises her beauty and promises the prosperity their union will bring. This was not simply a metaphor for agricultural fertility, it was a direct cause. The ritual also served a crucial political function. By successfully performing the role of Dumuzi, the king demonstrated his divine right to rule. He proved he was the chosen vessel of the gods, the only man capable of channeling their life-giving power to his people. His legitimacy was therefore not just inherited or taken by force. It was renewed and sanctified each year through this most intimate of ceremonies. The entire Mesopotamian worldview hinged on this idea that the fate of humanity was inextricably linked to the will and the well-being of the gods. The sacred marriage was the ultimate maintenance of that relationship, a tender, powerful, and absolutely essential act that held chaos at bay and kept the world in bloom. This obsession with water and purity finds one of its most ancient expressions in the silent, sun-baked ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. There, at the city's very heart, stands the Great Bath, an architectural marvel that has puzzled scholars for generations. This structure is not a simple pool. It is a masterpiece of early engineering, a massive, watertight tank meticulously constructed with finely fitted bricks and a thick layer of bitumen to prevent any leakage. A colonnade and series of private rooms surround it, suggesting this was no public swimming hole but a highly controlled, sacred space. The entire complex hints at a ritual of profound importance, likely centered on purification. Just as the Ganges holds spiritual significance today, this bath may have been the Indus Valley's own holy site for ablution. A priestly class, the city's spiritual leaders, would have descended its carefully laid steps to immerse themselves in its waters. This was not about washing away physical dirt, but about achieving a state of ritual cleanliness necessary to approach the divine. The act of bathing here was probably a prerequisite for performing other sacred duties, a symbolic cleansing of the soul before one could mediate between the people and the powers that governed their world. The sophistication of the supporting structures is just as telling. An intricate drainage system channels used water out of the bath, demonstrating a clear concern with stagnation and contamination, both physical and spiritual. The small surrounding rooms could have been used for disrobing, for anointing with oils, or for solitary meditation before the ritual immersion. What gods were they preparing to address, and what prayers were whispered in those echoing chambers? The Great Bath stands as a silent, powerful testament to a civilization that understood a fundamental truth, that to connect with the cosmos, one must first be clean, both in body and in spirit. The shadow of Carthage holds a chilling mystery, one that forces us to confront the most difficult questions about ancient belief. On the outskirts of that great Phoenician city lay the Tophet, a sacred and deeply unsettling precinct. This was not a grand temple, but a sprawling, open-air sanctuary filled with thousands of small stone markers. Beneath each one rested a ceramic urn, and inside these urns were the cremated remains of infants and young animals, primarily lambs. The air in this place must have been heavy with the scent of smoke and grief. Classical historians like Diodorus Siculus recorded a horrifying scene. He described a bronze statue of the god the Greeks called Cronus, equivalent to the Carthaginian Baal Hammon. The statue's hands were outstretched and sloped downward, and according to the account, living children were placed upon them, only to roll off into a pit of roaring fire below. The parents were forbidden from weeping, as this act was considered the highest form of devotion, a sacrifice for the good of the entire community. Yet the modern interpretation of the Tophet is fiercely debated. One school of thought takes the ancient texts at face value. They see this as literal, large-scale child sacrifice, a desperate offering to Baal Hammon during times of extreme crisis like war, plague, or famine, to appease a vengeful deity. The bones of the lambs, in this view, were merely substitute offerings when a child was not available. The other side of the argument presents a more archaeological perspective. They point to the fact that many of the infant remains show signs of prenatal conditions or diseases that would have been fatal in infancy. These scholars argue the Tophet was a special cemetery reserved for children who died naturally before they could be formally named and accepted into the family. The animal remains buried alongside them were simply votive gifts for the afterlife, and the lurid stories from Greek and Roman sources were merely propaganda, designed to paint their bitter rival as monstrous barbarians. So which is the truth? Was the Tophet a site of unimaginable piety or profound tragedy? The silent bones cannot tell us, leaving us with a haunting choice between two equally powerful and disturbing possibilities. Deep in the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization carved a legacy of stone, one dominated by a single, fearsome image. The word jaguar, a creature with the snarling mouth of a great cat and the body of a human, stares out from colossal heads and intricate carvings. This was not a mythical monster in the way we think of one today. It was the ultimate expression of shamanic power, a portrait of spiritual transformation. For the Olmec, the jaguar was the true master of the night, a creature that moved unseen between the physical world and the spirit realm. To merge with this animal was to access its immense strength, its stealth, and its profound connection to the unseen forces of nature. The ritual to achieve this was a perilous journey of the mind. A shaman, likely a spiritual leader of immense importance, would prepare to cross the boundary between human and beast. They would ingest powerful hallucinogens, perhaps a secretion from the bufo toad, a substance known to induce vivid, out-of-body experiences and radical shifts in perception. This was not a reckless act, but a carefully controlled descent into another state of being. As the toxins took effect, the shaman's consciousness would begin to unravel. The solid world would melt away, and their sense of self would dissolve. In this profound trance, they would feel their own humanity recede, replaced by the raw, primal essence of the jaguar. Their vision might sharpen to see in the dark, their senses would attune to the subtle movements of the spirit world, and they would gain the predator's instinctual understanding of life and death. This transformation was believed to grant direct access to divine knowledge. The shaman, now a hybrid being, could commune with ancestral spirits, diagnose the spiritual causes of illness, and even influence the weather to ensure fertile crops. The snarling were jaguar statues we see today are not depictions of a monster, but of a shaman at the peak of his ritual power, a human who has successfully harnessed the soul of the jungle's most potent creature to act as a mediator for his entire people. A profound and transformative secret was guarded for nearly 2,000 years just a short journey from Athens. The Eleusinian mysteries offered something unique in the ancient world, a direct and personal promise of a blessed afterlife, a comfort not found in the often bleak Greek underworld. Each year, thousands of initiates would walk the sacred way, a procession covering nearly 13 miles from Athens to the cult center at Eleusis. They were not priests or nobles alone, but a diverse mix of people, from slaves to philosophers, all bound by a sacred oath of silence. The journey itself was a ritual of purification and anticipation, a physical pilgrimage mirroring an inner, spiritual trek. Upon reaching the great hall of the Telesterion, the true mystery began. In the flickering torchlight, surrounded by towering columns, the initiates witnessed something they were forbidden, on pain of death, to ever reveal. We know the experience was staggering. The Roman orator Cicero, himself an initiate, wrote that the rites taught the very art of living joyfully and dying with a better hope. The key to this revelation was likely a powerful psychoactive potion called the kykeon. This was a simple barley drink, but scholars theorize it was deliberately contaminated with ergot, a fungus that contains compounds similar to LSD. This was not a recreational drug, it was a sacred sacrament. Drinking it would have dissolved the boundaries of ordinary perception, plunging the initiate into a vivid, visionary state. They may have believed they were traveling to the underworld and back, reenacting the myth of the goddess Demeter's grief for her daughter Persephone, and the joyous cycle of death and rebirth that myth represented. The secret died with the last initiate when the sanctuary was destroyed in the 4th century. We can only get at the specific visions, the sacred objects shown, or the words spoken in that hall. Yet the enduring power of the mysteries lies in that very secrecy, a collective human experience so profound that those who lived it chose to carry its mystery to their graves, leaving us to wonder what truth they found in the darkness. The thirst of the desert was mirrored in the rituals of the Mach, a people whose survival depended on more than just water. On the sun-baked coast of ancient Peru, their ceremonies were acts of cosmic nourishment, and the price was human blood. Their art leaves little to the imagination, with stirrup spout bottles and intricate murals depicting a single, terrifying figure again and again. This was Aiaiapik, the Decapitator, a fanged deity who was both a mountain god and a sea monster. In their world, the elite warrior priests did not just serve this god, they became him for a sacred, brutal ritual. The ceremony began not in a temple, but on the battlefield. Mach warriors, clad in fine tunics and elaborate helmets, would seek out worthy opponents from rival valleys. Their goal was not mass slaughter, but the capture of a specific, strong enemy combatant. This captured warrior was not a mere prisoner. He was a central actor in a divine drama. Brought back to the ceremonial precinct, he was forced to engage in a ritualized combat, a final, public display of his strength. The outcome, however, was never in doubt. Exhausted and often stripped of his armor, he would be overwhelmed by the warrior priests. Then, in a climactic act, the lead priest, embodying Aiaiapik, would raise a tumi knife, a crescent-shaped blade of gleaming gold or copper. With a single, practiced motion, he would sever the victim's head. But the ritual did not end with death. The priest would then catch the blood flowing from the neck in a ceremonial cup. This was the most crucial element. Archaeological evidence suggests this cup, often found in Mach tombs, contained more than just blood. It was likely mixed with a potent psychoactive substance, perhaps from the San Pedro cactus, a plant sacred to Andean peoples for millennia. The priest and his elite circle would then drink from this gruesome chalice. Why would they perform such a terrifying act? For the Mach, this was not senseless violence. It was a direct transaction with the forces of nature. The blood of a strong warrior was the most powerful offering one could make. By consuming it, the priests were channeling the victim's life force, his vitality and courage, and returning it to the spiritual realm. This act was believed to directly influence the mountains to release life-giving water into the rivers, and compel the Pacific Ocean to provide a bounty of fish. The sacrifice fed the gods, who in turn fed the people. It was a brutal, reciprocal cycle that maintained the entire cosmic and social order, ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would come, and the authority of the priestly class remained unchallenged. The life-giving power of blood and the terrifying force of the jaguar both speak to a universal human quest, the need to harness unseen energies. Across the vast Pacific, Polynesian navigators built entire societies around a single, all-pervading force they called mana. This was not a god to be worshipped, but a sacred, impersonal power that flowed through the entire universe, from the mightiest chief to the smallest stone. Mana was the spiritual current behind all success and all failure. A warrior's victory in battle, a farmer's abundant harvest, a canoe's safe journey across thousands of miles of open ocean. All of this was evidence of strong, flowing mana. The entire social structure was a ritual designed to manage this power. At the top were the alii, the high chiefs, who were believed to be born with immense concentrations of mana, making them literally untouchable by common people. Their very bodies were living reservoirs of this cosmic force. To protect this power and prevent its dangerous leakage, an intricate system of tapu, a word we now know as taboo, was enforced by powerful priests, the kahuna. Tapu was not merely a list of forbidden actions, it was a map of spiritual boundaries. In Hawaii, it was tapu for a commoner's shadow to fall upon the chief, for this could siphon away his sacred energy. In Aotearoa, which we call New Zealand, a great chief could place a fishing ground under tapu, preserving its resources for a sacred ceremony. On Rapa Nui, the construction of the massive moai statues was an immense ritual act, designed to channel the mana of ancestral chiefs into the living world, ensuring the island's continued vitality. The consequences for breaking a tapu were immediate and severe. If a person ate food reserved for a chief or entered a sacred temple ground, they didn't just break a law, they committed a spiritual crime. This act would cause their own mana to drain away, inviting sickness, crop failure, or even death, not just for the individual, but for their entire family. The universe itself would fall out of balance. Restoration required a complex purification ritual performed by a kahuna, often involving chants, offerings, and sometimes even the sacrifice of an animal to replenish the lost spiritual energy. This entire worldview, from the grandeur of a chief to the simplicity of a forbidden path, was a continuous, living ritual. Every action was either a careful channeling of mana or a reckless spilling of it, a constant dance with the invisible forces that held their world together. Descending into a kiva was like stepping out of the everyday world and into the Earth's memory. These circular, subterranean chambers, built by the ancestral Pueblones throughout the American Southwest, were far more than simple rooms. They were portals to the beginning of time. The architecture itself was a sacred map. A small hole in the floor, the sipapu, was the ritual's absolute heart. This was not just a feature, it was the very point of emergence, the portal through which the first ancestors had climbed into this world from the previous one below. Every ceremony held in that space was a deliberate reconnection to that primordial moment of origin. A central fire pit would cast flickering shadows on the plastered walls, its smoke rising through a hole in the ceiling, mirroring the journey of prayers ascending to the spirits above. In this dark, secluded, and intensely focused environment, the community would gather. The air would have been thick with the scent of burning pinyon pine and the rhythmic, hypnotic sound of chanting and drumming. These were not performances for an audience, they were collective acts of power. Through shared rhythm and song, the people believed they could thin the veil between worlds, calling upon the Kachina spirits to join them. The walls of these chambers often bore stunning murals, their colors still vibrant after centuries. These paintings are our clearest window into their beliefs, depicting rows of Kachina figures. These are not gods in a distant heaven, but powerful spirit beings who serve as messengers between the Pueblo people and the divine. They bring rain for the corn, they ensure fertility, and they teach the people the proper way to live. To witness a Kiva ceremony would have been to see a community physically entering the underworld to speak directly with the forces that created them, emerging reassured that their ancestors were still listening, and that the Kachinas were still watching over their fragile world. A king's most critical decisions were not made in his court, but through a conversation with the spirit world. In the heart of the Shang dynasty, a civilization that flourished along the Yellow River over 3,000 years ago, the future was read in fire and bone. This was the ritual of oracle bone divination, a sophisticated form of pyromancy reserved for the king and his most trusted diviners. The process began with careful preparation. A diviner would take a cleaned and polished piece of material, most often the shoulder bone of an ox or the underside shell of a turtle. These were not random choices. The turtle, with its hard shell and long life, symbolized the cosmos itself, its plastron representing the round heaven and its carapace the square earth. The ox bone, massive and strong, connected to the earthly realm of agriculture and power. Onto this sacred surface, the diviner would meticulously carve a question using a sharp bronze tool. The inscriptions were direct and profound. Will the harvest be abundant? Should we launch a military campaign against the neighboring tribe? Is the king's toothache caused by an angry ancestor? These were not casual inquiries, they were matters of state and survival. The next step was the application of intense heat. The diviner would press a red-hot bronze rod into hollows carved on the back of the bone or shell. The thermal stress was immense, and with an audible pop, a network of cracks would spiderweb across the other side. This was the moment of truth. The pattern of these cracks was not seen as random. It was a written language from the gods and ancestral spirits, a direct answer to the inscribed question. The diviner, trained in this arcane art, would read the shapes and directions of the cracks, interpreting them as a positive or negative response, often with specific conditions attached. The king would then make his final decision based on this divine counsel, but the ritual did not end there. After the reading, the date, the topic, and sometimes even the eventual outcome of the event were often carved right next to the original question. This final act of record-keeping is what makes the oracle bones one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history. They are not merely artifacts of superstition, they are the earliest known archive of Chinese writing, a direct line to the thoughts, fears, and administrative concerns of a lost civilization. We know the names of their kings, the dates of their battles, and the specific ailments that troubled them, all because they believed so deeply that the cracks in a burned piece of bone held the voice of the universe itself. The human head held a sacred and terrifying power in the Celtic world. Across ancient Europe, from Gaul to Britain, warriors believed the head was not just a part of the body, but the very vessel of the soul, a container for a person's strength, wisdom, and life force. This was not a metaphor, it was a spiritual fact that drove one of their most distinctive rituals. When a Celtic warrior defeated a worthy and powerful enemy in battle, the ultimate prize was not a weapon or a piece of armor. It was the opponent's head. The act of decapitation was performed with reverence, not mere brutality. By taking the head, a warrior was capturing the essence of his foe, absorbing their courage and their knowledge, and preventing their vengeful spirit from returning. This was the ultimate form of respect for a formidable adversary. The head was then carefully prepared, often boiled in herbs to preserve it, and proudly displayed. Greek and Roman historians recorded their horror at seeing these trophies nailed to temple walls or fastened to the front of chariots. But for the Celts, this public exhibition was a testament to their own spiritual and martial power. They were not hiding their actions, they were proclaiming them. The most powerful heads, however, were not left out in the weather. They were enshrined. At the sanctuary of Intremont in southern France, archaeologists uncovered stone pillars carved with rows of stylized human heads, their eyes closed in an eternal peace. Nearby, niches were found that once held actual skulls, suggesting this was a sacred space for communing with the captured spirits. Even more telling are the discoveries in the River Thames in London. Dozens of human skulls from the Iron Age have been pulled from the muddy riverbed, most without their bodies. These were not victims of a massacre. They show no signs of violent injury beyond the careful removal from the spine. The leading theory is that these were ritual offerings, precious heads given back to the water, a sacred element, perhaps to appease a god or to release the powerful soul within after it had been honored for a generation. This cult of the head reveals a worldview where the boundary between life and death was porous, and the spirit of a great person was a tangible force to be captured, revered, and carefully managed. In the shadows of the Roman Empire, a different kind of soldier sought salvation not in the sunlight of the battlefield, but in the dark embrace of an underground cave. The cult of Mithras was a secretive, all-male fraternity that captivated the hearts and minds of legionaries, offering them a path to spiritual victory through a series of harrowing initiations. At the heart of every Mithraeum, the small, windowless temple built to resemble a cavern was a single, powerful image carved in stone. This was the Tauroctony, the sacred bull slaying. It shows the god Mithras, his face often turned away, driving a dagger into the bull's shoulder. A dog and a snake leap toward the wound, while a scorpion clutches the animal's testicles. To the uninitiated, it appears to be a simple scene of sacrifice, but every element is a complex code. This was not a literal killing, but a cosmic map. The bull represented the constellation Taurus, and each animal was a celestial symbol. The scorpion was Scorpio, the snake was Hydra, and the dog was Canis Minor. Mithras himself was associated with Perseus. The entire tableau was a sophisticated astrological chart, depicting a specific moment in the precession of the equinoxes, a grand celestial cycle. The ritual reenactment of this scene was believed to unlock a profound spiritual truth for the initiate. By symbolically participating in the bull's death, which released life-giving energy into the world, the soldier was preparing his own soul for an epic journey. The ultimate goal was to ascend after death through the 7 spheres of the planets, each one governed by a different celestial power. To reach this salvation, a man had to prove his worth through a brutal and rigorous initiation process. There were 7 grades of membership, each one more demanding than the last. A new recruit, the Raven, would begin his journey, and if he endured, he could advance to become a bridegroom, a soldier, a lion, a Persian, a courier of the sun, and finally, a father. Each stage came with its own trials, designed to test the limits of mind and body. Initiates might be subjected to extremes of heat and cold, or challenged with symbolic ordeals that mimicked death and rebirth. Some rituals involved blindfolding and binding, only to be released at the last moment. The culmination of certain grades was a ritual feast, where members would share bread and wine, commemorating a legendary meal shared by Mithras and the sun god. These ceremonies, held in the cramped, subterranean darkness, were intensely powerful. The flickering lamplight would dance across the carved Tauroctony, bringing the astrological symbols to life. The chants and the shared hardship forged an unbreakable bond between the men, creating a spiritual brotherhood that rivaled their military loyalties. For a Roman soldier, whose life was defined by order and hierarchy, the Mithraic mysteries offered a structured path to transcendence, a secret conquest of the cosmos waiting just beneath their feet. The quest for spiritual power on Rapa Nui took a dramatic and dangerous turn. As the resources needed to carve and transport the massive Moai statues dwindled, the island's culture pivoted toward a new, living ritual, the Birdman competition. Each year in the spring, the focus shifted from the silent, monolithic giants to the perilous cliffs of the volcano Rano Kau. At its summit, the ceremonial village of Orongo sprang to life, its stone houses facing 3 small, offshore islets. The most distant of these, Madu Nui, was the target of a trial that tested human endurance to its absolute limit. The competitors, known as Hapu, were not warriors but athletes chosen by the island's chiefly clans. Their task was breathtakingly hazardous. They had to descend nearly 1,000 feet of sheer, crumbling cliff face, then launch themselves into the cold, churning Pacific. Their swim to Marunui covered over a mile of open ocean, waters known to be patrolled by sharks. Upon reaching the rugged islet, the Hapu faced a long and anxious wait, sometimes for weeks, living in caves and surviving on raw seafood. They were all watching the skies for one thing: the arrival of the first sooty tern egg of the breeding season. The moment that egg was laid, the race transformed. The Hapu who found it would signal his success to the priests watching from Orongo, then carefully tie the precious egg to his forehead with a band of cloth. His return journey was the most dangerous leg, requiring the same treacherous swim and climb, all while protecting a fragile, symbolic prize. The man who finally presented the unbroken egg to his patron chief achieved a monumental victory. That chief was then declared the Tangata Manyu, the Birdman, for the coming year. This was not an empty title. The Birdman was imbued with immense sacred status, or mana, and his clan gained temporary political authority over the island's resources. For 1 year, he lived in seclusion, his head shaved and his body painted, a living deity who could not cut his long, curling fingernails. The entire social order was reset by this athletic and spiritual feat. The petroglyphs carved into the volcanic rock at Orongo tell this story without a single word. Hundreds of intricate images show the half-human, half-bird figure of the Tangata Manyu, his body in profile, and his eyes often holding the gaze of a seabird. These carvings are a permanent record of a society that shifted its worship from stone ancestors to the raw, competitive vitality of life itself, a desperate and brilliant adaptation to a changing world. A king's desperate prayer echoes from a clay tablet, a plea for deliverance from a plague sweeping through his kingdom. The Hittite solution was not a medical cure, but a profound act of spiritual transference. When disaster struck, be it pestilence, famine, or a string of military defeats, the Hittites believed their world had been poisoned by sin, miasma, or the direct anger of a forgotten god. To cleanse the land, they performed an elaborate scapegoat ritual, a ceremony of targeted purification. The chosen vessel for this could be a goat, a bull, a dog, or in times of extreme crisis, a human prisoner of war. This living being was not simply killed. It was first transformed into a sacred container. Priests would adorn the animal or person with fine textiles, precious metals, and sometimes even a crown, symbolically elevating its status. Then, through a powerful series of incantations and symbolic acts, they would transfer the collective guilt, the sickness, and the divine wrath onto this single entity. A common practice involved the king and queen, or the entire community, laying their hands upon the creature, physically pressing the spiritual contamination into it. The ritual words were explicit, commanding all evil to now reside within this decorated substitute. Once fully laden with the impurities of the people, the scapegoat was not sacrificed. Its role was to carry the contamination away. It was driven out with great ceremony, expelled from the city, and chased deep into the wilderness, across the border into enemy lands, or sent down a river on a small boat. The goal was to put as much distance as possible between the community and the concentrated evil they had created. This was a physical and spiritual reset for the entire kingdom. You may recognize a powerful parallel in the 16th chapter of the Hebrew Bible's book of Leviticus. There, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest Aaron confesses the sins of the people over a goat, laying his hands upon its head before a man chosen for the task leads it out into the desert, releasing it to Azazel, a wilderness demon. The symbolic language and the core mechanism are strikingly similar, suggesting a shared understanding of sin as a tangible substance that could be gathered and removed. For the Hittite state, this was more than a folk remedy, it was a fundamental pillar of their state religion. The king, as the chief priest, was responsible for maintaining cosmic order. A plague was a sign of his failure, a crack in the divine contract. By orchestrating the scapegoat ritual, he publicly demonstrated his role as the restorer of balance, purifying his people and proving his ability to communicate with the gods. It was a dramatic performance of royal power. a way of saying that even the god's fury could be managed, contained, and sent packing into the barren hills. The Nabateans carved their prayers into the very mountaintops. High above the bustling trade routes and the hidden city of Petra, they ascended to places like Jebel Madba, the mountain of the altar, to meet their gods in the thin desert air. These high places were not simple shrines, but vast, open-air sanctuaries meticulously carved from the rose-red sandstone at the summit. The journey itself was a form of devotion, a steep, arduous climb that left the mundane world far below, preparing the pilgrim for an encounter with the divine. At the center of the flattened peak stood the altar, a massive rectangular block of stone, often with a shallow basin carved into its top. Here, under the blazing sun or a canopy of stars, priests would perform sacrifices to Dishara, the supreme Nabatean god, and other deities of their pantheon. The offering was typically an animal, a sheep or a goat, its life given as a gift to secure divine favor for the caravan city below. But the true genius of these rituals is etched into the rock itself. Surrounding the altar, one finds an intricate network of shallow channels and small cisterns carved with precision. These were not for water, but for blood. As the sacrifice was made, the vital fluid would be carefully channeled away from the sacred platform, draining into these reservoirs to be collected or allowed to seep back into the earth as an offering. This was a ritual of profound cleanliness and order, even in its most visceral moment. The location was everything. Perched on the edge of the world, with a panoramic view of the vast desert and dramatic canyons, the experience was designed to overwhelm the senses. The sheer isolation made the participants feel closer to the gods, while the breathtaking vista served as a constant reminder of the power they sought to appease. It was a theater of awe, where the drama of sacrifice played out against an epic backdrop, a stark and powerful conversation between a desert people and the formidable forces that ruled their sky. The writhing serpent becomes a symbol of life itself in the hands of a goddess. On the island of Crete, the Minoans crafted exquisite figurines from faience, a glazed ceramic, depicting a powerful female figure. She stands with a commanding posture, her arms outstretched, and in each hand she grasps a snake, its body coiled as if in motion. Perched calmly upon her headdress is a feline, a lioness or a domestic cat, adding another layer of potent symbolism. These statues, discovered in palace shrines and sacred repositories at Knossos, were not mere decorations. They were the focal point of a vibrant household and state religion centered on a powerful female divinity. The rituals performed before her were intimate acts of devotion, likely led by women who served as priestesses. They would have offered libations, perhaps of wine or honey, and chanted prayers, all while holding live serpents as part of their sacred duties. Why would a culture venerate a goddess of snakes? The answer lies in the creature's very nature. A snake sheds its skin, emerging seemingly renewed, making it a perfect emblem of rebirth, regeneration, and the eternal cycles of the earth. Furthermore, the snake lives in holes and crevices within the ground, connecting it directly to the chthonic powers, the spirits of the underworld who controlled the fertility of the soil and the fate of the dead. By holding these creatures, the goddess and her priestesses were demonstrating their command over these fundamental, life and death forces. The feline on her head reinforces this connection to the wild, untamed aspects of nature, a creature of both grace and lethal power. This was a religion deeply concerned with protection and healing. In a world without modern medicine, the ability to appease the chthonic spirits meant the difference between a bountiful harvest and famine, between health and sickness. A household would keep a small shrine with a figurine of the snake goddess to guard against evil and ensure the family's well-being. The prominence of women in these rituals, so clearly depicted in Minoan frescoes and art, suggests a society where female spiritual authority was not just accepted, but was central to their understanding of the world. The snake goddess did not rule from a distant heaven. She held the very forces of life and death in her bare hands, and her priestesses knew how to speak her language. The howls of the Scythians pierced the stillness of the Central Asian steppes, a sound of wild joy rising from within a simple, woolen tent. These nomadic warriors, masters of the horseback and the bow, practiced a purification rite so intense it left a profound impression on the Greek historian Herodotus. He recorded a ceremony centered not on water, but on vapor. The Scythians would first construct a small, enclosed space by lashing 3 poles together into a frame, which they then draped tightly with heavy woolen felts, creating a sealed and private chamber. Inside this makeshift sanctuary, they would place a bronze basin filled with red-hot stones. Then came the crucial ingredient: handfuls of hemp seeds were cast onto the glowing rocks. The result was immediate. A thick, pungent vapor filled the tent, a dense fog of heated cannabis resin. The Scythians seated within would inhale this vapor deeply, their lungs filling with the psychoactive smoke. They did not sit in silence, they howled and cried out in euphoria, their voices raised in a collective, ecstatic roar. For them, this was the ultimate steam bath, but its purpose went far beyond physical cleanliness. The ritual was a powerful tool for spiritual scrubbing, a way to sweat out spiritual impurities and cleanse the soul. The intense, altered state induced by the vapor was not seen as intoxication, but as a sacred doorway. It was a method to achieve a trance-like ecstasy, breaking the bonds of ordinary consciousness to commune directly with the ancestors and the powerful spirits of the boundless steppe. In that hot, smoky, and noisy tent, these fierce nomads believed they were traveling to the other side, returning purified, empowered, and reassured of their place in the spirit world. 25, the final ritual, takes us to the very dawn of civilization, to a hill in southeastern Turkey known as Göbekli Tepe. Here, over 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers accomplished something that should have been impossible. They erected the world's oldest known temple, a complex of massive, circular enclosures defined by colossal, T-shaped limestone pillars. Each pillar weighs tons, and they are arranged in great rings, with 2 even larger monoliths standing at the center of each circle. This was not a village or a shelter. It was a purely ceremonial space built by people who had not yet invented pottery, writing, or even agriculture. The scale of the labor is staggering, requiring the coordination of hundreds of people to quarry, carve, and transport these stones. But the true mystery is carved into the stone itself. The pillars are not blank. They are covered in a breathtaking menagerie of animal reliefs. Foxes, cranes, scorpions, boars, and lions swarm across the surfaces, their forms crisp and powerful, as if frozen in motion. This was not random decoration. Each animal likely served as a totem, a spiritual emblem for a different clan that traveled great distances to gather at this sacred hill. The rituals performed here would have been the glue that bound these disparate groups together. We can piece together fragments of their ceremonies from the archaeological evidence. The site is littered with the bones of aurochs, gazelles, and wild sheep, evidence of massive, communal feasts. These were not simple meals, they were epic celebrations, perhaps held seasonally, where the act of sharing food forged powerful social bonds and reinforced a shared identity. At the center of it all were the pillars themselves, the animal spirits made stone. It is easy to envision a shaman, cloaked in the skin of one of these creatures, standing before a pillar and entering a trance. In that altered state, they might have believed they were communicating directly with the spirit of the bull or the cunning intelligence of the fox, seeking their favor for the hunt or their protection for the journey ahead. The entire complex feels like a spiritual arena, a place where humanity first learned to build monuments to the forces of nature it could not control. And this leads to the site's ultimate enigma. After more than 1,000 years of use, Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned and left to decay. It was deliberately and carefully buried. Every circle, every pillar, was filled with thousands of tons of earth and stone, preserving it perfectly until its modern rediscovery. Why would a people who invested so much labor into this sacred place decide to entomb it? Was it an act of reverence, a way to retire and protect the old gods as their world changed and new beliefs emerged? Or was it an act of fear, a desperate attempt to contain the powerful spirits they had summoned there for over a millennium? The silent, buried pillars offer no answer, leaving us with a profound and haunting question from the very edge of human memory. Across these 25 rituals, from the Maya ball court to the buried pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we have wandered through the deepest chambers of the human spirit. Each civilization, in its own unique and often startling way, wove a sacred tapestry from the threads of fear, hope, and wonder. These practices were not mere superstitions. They were the very operating systems of their worlds, the foundational codes that gave meaning to the harvest, explained the storm, and offered a path through the terror of death. They shaped laws, inspired art, and launched kings. They were the desperate and beautiful attempts of our ancestors to find their place in a vast, mysterious, and often unforgiving cosmos. The desire to reach beyond the visible world, to plead with the storm or bargain with the sun, is a thread that connects us all, a fundamental part of the human story. It speaks to a shared longing to feel that we are not alone, that our lives have purpose within a grander design. So we leave you with one final question, a mystery for you to carry forward. Which of these rituals did you find the most fascinating, or perhaps the most terrifying? Was it the silent, frozen sacrifice on an Andean peak, or the ecstatic howls from a Scythian vapor tent? Did the calculated cosmic reset of the Aztec New Fire ceremony capture your imagination, or the intimate, transformative power of the Eleusinian Kaikian? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know which journey into the past resonated most deeply with you. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like the video and subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of history, where the echoes of lost worlds are still waiting to be heard.